Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for today's video. We've got a lot going on, and we've had a lot going on for the past 24 hours. Really just some crazy weather that went down yesterday here across the southeast, including tornadoes, hail, and some very intense straight line winds. All of that in the middle of January. So, crazy pattern we've been in, and it looks like it's only going to get crazier as we continue to go ahead of time. Just to give you some insight on how crazy this pattern has been, we had some insane storms yesterday, and now today we have winter storm warnings in the mountains of North Carolina. So really a real 180. But we have a lot to talk about in today's video about this pattern, including the chance of maybe some snow making its way into North Carolina, maybe even South Carolina tomorrow night. And I don't mean the mountains either. I mean the eastern sections of these states out towards the beaches. So, something we didn't really see coming, but we'll look at that. And then also some snow potentially moving into sections of New England going into later this weekend and early next week. And then we have another storm system that is going to move through going into next week. So a lot going on, a lot has already happened, and it looks like January is just not going to let up, and it's going to keep on giving us some of this crazy weather. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. But before we do that, I do want to talk about yesterday's storm chase I did down into South Carolina. I had a blast doing it, a ton of fun, and I came across this very impressive storm yesterday. So this was actually a part of that QLCS, or squall line, as a lot of people like to call it, or just that very long, intense line of storms that stretch from the Gulf Coast all the way up through the Carolinas. And this is in Campobello, South Carolina. So this is along Highway 11 near the North Carolina-South Carolina border. It's hard to see, but the mountains are over in this general direction. But if you look at the storm, just an absolute beauty. You see the shelf cloud here that I was able to come across. If I can get my pen to work, sorry. There we go. The shelf cloud I was able to come across, as well as you see this greenish tint here. That indicates the hail core inside of this. It was really a bit of an embedded supercell within this QLCS. And, this part of the storm caught my attention. It may be a wall cloud, maybe just a part of this shelf cloud, but at the time it was definitely spinning. So, crazy storm. And this same general segment of the storm ended up producing a tornado warning later closer to Charlotte. So, just a very powerful storm and crazy stuff to see for January. But as of right now, we continue to have crazy weather going on. The mountains of North Carolina yesterday were under a severe thunderstorm warning and tornado watch at one point, and now they are under a winter storm warning. So a real crazy just 12 hours, honestly, here across this section of the country. But yeah, we're getting some of that really nice northwest flow right now into the mountains of North Carolina, as you can see on radar here. And even some snow showers up through Kentucky, West Virginia, through the Ohio River Valley. And then some precipitation still ongoing up here into Maine, as what's left of that snow continues to fall in extreme northern Maine, and then rain here probably in southern sections of Maine. And then still that active weather ongoing out west with just what has felt like a never-ending pattern. But luckily for you out west, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It looks like we're going to finally change this pattern up. So looking at infrared, you can see what's left of this strong cold front beginning to push well offshore now, just clipping sections of New England still, and then still very unsettled weather going on out west, which will once again likely lead to another storm here in the east later next week, and we're going to keep our eye out on that and prepare ourselves for round whatever number we're at this point. Looking at our hazards currently, winter storm warnings here going on in the mountains of North Carolina, as we've been talking about. Still some leftover winter storm warnings in northern Maine as well for that system. And then in the blue here, we have those winter weather advisories for some of those snow squalls that have been moving through sections here of the east. So I do want to talk about what's left of these snow squalls, as well as that chance of potentially some snow here into the eastern Carolinas going into tomorrow night, especially out towards the Raleigh area. I think has the best shot at this. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. So this is currently here. You can see these snow squalls continuing to impact us here into Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and then, of course, the higher elevations of western North Carolina getting in on some of that snow. And you can see going through this evening, those snow squalls will continue. But what I want you to note here going into tonight is we have some leftover precipitation due to this secondary low that we had been talking about, trying to crank up here and tapping into whatever moisture is left and bringing some bands of rain here across the Carolinas. And what that will do, since the cold front has already moved through, is potentially you see some blues working their way in here, as well as those snow squalls still ongoing. So going into tonight, this is it's a bit more optimistic than a lot of our other models, but I just wanted to show you what, the ceiling of this kind of could be. This is a pretty good little swath of snow, maybe even moderate snow at times. So, if something like this were to verify, maybe someone could get half an inch of snow out of this here into sections around Raleigh, kind of in between Charlotte and Raleigh here into North Carolina. And then that will eventually fizzle out as we get into tomorrow morning and we begin to dry out. But again, any precipitation left over, maybe even down towards the Grand Strand here into eastern sections of South Carolina, maybe some flurries could fly. Be more of a novelty event than anything, but nonetheless cool to see since we haven't seen really anything yet this year. So looking at those snowfall totals, I still have a ton of snow to go here into the mountains of North Carolina. Especially, those higher elevations above 4,000 feet. But, somebody could still see, maybe 6 to 12 inches of snow. I think, anything above a foot would be a bit over exceeding, but you never know out of this. And then even up into West Virginia here, still that snow ongoing. And then you see this little blip of small accumulation showing up here. So these are all of our models blended together. Again, showing there's at least that chance of maybe some flurries or light snow here across sections of eastern and east central North Carolina tonight. As for the Northeast, again, that secondary low we were talking about looks like it'll try to work its way up here into sections of eastern Massachusetts, especially the beaches here, as we get into later this weekend. So this is going into Saturday morning here, and you see that low pressure here is bringing enough moisture over that even a place like Boston getting in on some precipitation, there'll be a fine line here. If this shield of precipitation moves further offshore, then Boston's more likely to see that snow. If it moves further this way, then Boston more likely to see that rain just because of some of that warm air working its way in. But I do think there will be a nice swath of 1 to 3 inches of snow here somewhere into eastern New England going into tonight. Right now, I would actually kind of favor the Boston area, kind of through this general area. I think this might be a bit far west, but we'll see, and we'll look at some of those snow totals, and then that snow will begin to move up into Maine before we clear out going into Sunday. And then maybe just some leftover snow showers here across the Cape going into the rest of the weekend. So looking at those snow totals here, again, this is our blended model, so this thinks a bit further east than the HUR was just showing. But, a swath of 1 to 3 inches of snow possible somewhere here throughout Massachusetts, Rhode Island, I think, and then up into Maine as well. All right, moving this ahead, let's go ahead and look at this week ahead of us and look to see what we can expect in that next storm that is on its way and that we're already planning out here and looking at going into the latter part of this coming week. So let's go and take a look at that here. So as we get into Sunday afternoon here, we're pretty much done with the system that is currently ongoing here across the east. Get a bit of a break here, although temperatures will be colder than they have been. Expect more January-like temperatures, even slightly below average for some of us here across the east after that cold front has come through. Sorry, taking a sip of my drink there. But as we get into the beginning part of this coming week, it does look like going into Monday, Tuesday, we do get our next system here to move through the east. I don't think this one will be very impactful, but will definitely bring some rain before the next bigger system comes in later in the week. But, starting off Monday, definitely Tuesday, though, some rain working its way here through the east. And snow should be confined to some pretty far northern areas here into the UP of Michigan, up towards Wisconsin and into Canada. So just some light showers going through your Tuesday here into the southeast, up through the mid-Atlantic, and into the northeast. Before we get into Wednesday and you see our next big system start to get going here throughout the central part of the country. Here on the GFS, you see that system getting going, bringing some heavy rain here into the southeast going into next Wednesday, and even some snow back out into the plains as this storm begins to crank up. You see here, this storm will get going. And the GFS here, although very different from the Euro, paints a very interesting picture for us here in the northeast. You see this band of snow breaking out here on the northern side of the system, rain to the southern side, and I don't think we'll have as much of a severe weather threat with this system compared to the one we just had, but we'll watch the trends on that. But I'm more intrigued in the chance of snow here across the northeast, the Ohio River Valley here with the GFS. This would be next Thursday afternoon here. You see that band of snow, and the GFS gets a pretty favorable track here for some snow, really from New York City up towards Boston and a big section here of New England. So the GFS works that through and potentially brings some snow in those areas. So that's the GFS. Let's take a look at the Euro now, and the GFS does clear out about the same, or about getting into next weekend, I should say. Looking at the Euro now, again, we get this one system to move through going into your Tuesday, bringing some rain through, for a lot of us here in the east. But that should clear out before the next system gets going into Wednesday here on the Euro. Again, potentially some snow here into the plains, and heavy rain is going to begin to fall here into the southeast going into next Wednesday and Thursday. Euro here, though, a bit stronger than the GFS, also a bit further north. So the Euro does have this big band of snow, but it's more of a Midwest, Great Lakes kind of event than the Northeast here. But the Euro does also have, quite a line of storms in here through the Southeast, although the conditions wouldn't be as prime here to get some of that snow, or the severe storms that we were dealing with this week. But nonetheless, the Euro does bring a line of storms here through the Southeast, and then brings that, snow kind of very similar to the system we just had. If you were to show me this image and ask me if that was a system we just had or a different one, I would think it's the one that we just went through. So the Euro shows a very similar setup here compared to what we were just dealing with within the past 48 hours here across the east. So that's the Euro, very different than the GFS, and then the Euro also clears that out going into next weekend. So two very different scenarios there. And we'll look at the chances of snow here again in a second and look at some of the ensembles to see just who I think has the best chance of this next system impacting with snow. I do want to talk about temperatures, though, going into next week, because obviously that does affect us here. This weekend, again, as I talked about, cooler than normal temperatures through a big section of the east here. So very different than what we've been dealing with. We're back kind of below average here since that cold front has moved through. As we get into early next week, some of those colder temperatures will hang around into the beginning part of the week before we get back above average ahead of that next system and during those kind of showery days during Tuesday, and then, of course, before that next system on Wednesday, back to well above average here in the east, before potentially, if we can get some of that cold air to work in and get snow here, that could cause, of course, lower than average temperatures. But looking at that chance of snow, we'll start here with our GFS ensembles. And again, you can see that chance of snow maybe into eastern North Carolina tonight. But once we move ahead and we get done with the system we're currently dealing with, once we get into next week, this is that system that could cause some snow here for some of us in this general pocket here from the Midwest through the Northeast. Looking at the GFS ensembles here, you really see the GFS putting a bit of a bullseye here on New England. Quite confident here with the GFS ensembles and seeing at least an inch of snow here throughout the Northeast. So that's always a good sign if you're looking for snow there before those chances begin to clear out. And we look at potentially maybe another system after that, but we'll touch on that later on in a different video. Looking at the Euro ensembles here, again, really quite similar to the GFS, just a bit further north as we saw in the operational run. The Euro had more snow up here into Canada, much like the system we just had, but does still get some pretty high chances here through sections of New England. So this is about a week out still, so we have plenty of time to nail down those details, but could definitely be looking at another impactful storm going into later next week, about the same time that we dealt with the system this week. All right, so now that we've talked about that, let's look at the long range here. And we'll look at all of our ensembles and see what we think the pattern is going to look like going past kind of the 7-day period into the 10-day period and even about 2 weeks out. So obviously all this is very subject to change because it is far out there, but we're just looking for general pattern details at this time. So looking at the GFS ensembles here, again, as we've been talking about, after the storm moves through next week, the one that we're still, kind of getting the details on, it looks like we do finally get that Pacific train of moisture to finally slow down, and we get some ridging back out in the Pacific. So that should help cut off kind of this atmospheric river we've been talking about that has continued to pump these storms in from the west coast and throughout the country. And then once we get through this storm next week that we're still, trying to figure out on the GFS ensembles here, once we go into the long range, you see the GFS gets quite a cold shot here into the western United States. So not the eastern United States here in the GFS. And in fact, the GFS has quite the southeast ridge here, pumping in warmer temperatures across the eastern half of the country once we get past 10 days. So now what you want to see if you want to see snow in the east in terms of the ensembles, you see the GFS just keeps that southeast ridge pumping that warm air into the eastern United States here really through the end of January with cooler weather out west. So that's the GFS. Let's look at the Euro now and see if we have any differences. So again, once we get through the storm next week, this is that storm we'll be dealing with next week here where you see these blues working their way through. On the Euro here, you see these blues more into the central and eastern United States. So more favorable for colder temperatures in the east compared to the GFS long range. And then, the Euro has that ridge a lot further to the east out on the west. So that's what you really want to see to get snow in the east. You want to see a ridge here so we can help funnel the colder air further to the east compared to the west. So the Euro continues this general idea going out into the end of January, although the Euro going long range does poke that southwest ridge in a little bit. So we'll obviously have to watch for that. So what does this translate into the long range? So the Euro here, with the colder solution, once we get past about day 10, you see these blues kind of overtake a big section of the lower 48 here. So with the look that we saw with the Euro, that would indicate colder temperatures further out in time compared to the GFS here, which further out in time you see has just colder temperatures out west, while we have these kind of warmer temperatures out east with that southwest ridge, or southeast ridge, excuse me. I think I've said southwest ridge a couple times now, but with that southeast ridge continuing to pump in those warmer conditions into the east. So long range, what we do really know is likely somebody will get cold air in the lower 48. Whether that is the east coast or the west coast, we still have time to figure that out and look at all of those options. But I do think someone in the lower 48 will likely get those colder temperatures to return once we get past the 7 to 10 day period. With that said, though, thank you for watching. And again, if you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe because we have a lot coming up here into January. And we're doing some pretty great things here on this channel. But other than that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow.